Rivka sees Baruch HaKodesh that Esav wants to kill Yaakov. She tells Yaakov to run away. Yaakov runs away and eventually ends up at the well and eventually ends up meeting Rachel. And instantly he understands that this is his bashert, and he immediately understands who she is, the essence of who she is, and they immediately agree to get married. And interestingly enough, the pasuk says, "Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel, vayisa kolo vayevch." Yaakov raises his voice and cries in a wail. Vayisa kolo means he literally let out a loud wail. Why did he raise his voice and cry? So Rashi has two explanations. The first is because he saw that she wouldn't be nichneses imo lekvura when she was going to be buried along the path, along the way, because the Klal Yisrael would need Rachel's tefillas many generations later. But the point is that Yaakov saw that she was not going to be buried with him, and therefore he cried. Now, let's stop on that for a minute. You probably are wondering, why is that a reason to raise your voice and cry? There's a reason why Rachel is going to be buried along the road, because the Klal Yisrael needs her. They need their tefillas, and that's what's appropriate, that's what's proper. Why are you crying? And if we take nothing else from this Rashi, just the understanding that a husband and wife are together, and there's a life together and an end together. They say that when Rav Pam was nifter, that night someone came to the apartment, and Rebbetzin Pam was ironing his kittel for the tachrichim. And that's a certain understanding that it's forever, it's a couple, it's for life. And again, when you see Yaakov Avinu raise his voice and crying because there's something lacking in the shleimus, it's not a complete marriage in the sense that we're not going to be buried together, you begin to understand that clearly marriage is a little different than we typically take it. But listen to the second answer, the Dover Acher, Rashi says. What's the other reason why, a different shot why Yaakov cried? Because he came biyadayim reikonius, he came empty-handed. As soon as he ran away, Esav sent his son Eliphaz to go chase down Yaakov. Eliphaz was a tzaddik. The Medrash explains that he grew up in the lap of Yitzhak. Eliphaz comes to Yaakov and he says, kill you, obviously I can't. But matia lediburo shel aviv. What's going to be with the dibur? My father gave me a shlichus. What am I going to do with that dibur? I can't just ignore it. So Yaakov says, okay, I hear. There's a lumdus ani choshev kemes. A dead man is considered in some level as if, a poor man is considered in some level as if he's dead. Take all of my money. And then in some way you fulfilled the kibbud av, you fulfilled the dibur of your father. And in fact, Yaakov parted with all his money, and he showed up to Rachel without the tremendous wealth. Yaakov raised his voice crying because he said, look at this. Eliezer, my father's servant, came with 10 camels laden with all types of things, and I show up empty-handed. Okay. Now I heard my Rabbi, the Shiva Zatzal, making a very interesting point here. And he says that Yaakov Avinu had a choice. He could have told Eliphaz, okay, tough luck. Your father is a wicked man. Your father gave you a tzavah, gave you a command to do something wrong. Tell your father you didn't do it and you're done. But that's not what Yaakov said. Yaakov said, I'll give you all of my money because at least you will fulfill somehow the dibur. And the Shiva Zatzal's point was, you see the extent, the incredible extent that Yaakov had for anyone's fulfillment of a mitzvah, even if it's just Eliphaz's mitzvah, even if it's not his own, and even if it's only not in the best way, Yaakov was willing to part with all of his money. Okay, everyone got that? Okay, good. In 1986, if you took $10,000 and you invested it in Microsoft at the IPO, and you sold those shares in 1999, your $10,000 would have then be worth $7 million. Now, I want you to imagine for a minute the following. Imagine that there's a young fellow who knows what's going to be. Eliyahu Navi tells him. And it's 1986, and he says to himself, this is incredible. and he scrounges and he borrows and he sells everything he has. And he gets everything everybody possibly can borrow a penny from, he does. And he invests $100,000 into Microsoft's initial public offering. And very shortly thereafter, he gets engaged. And he shows up to the college and says, listen, I'll be honest with you. I intended to buy you a beautiful diamond, but I have no money. I took all of the money and I invested in Microsoft. And I want you to understand, we're going to get married, we're going to have kids, and 13 years from now, I'm going to sell those shares, and it's going to be worth $80 million. So here's the question. Do you think she would say, oy vey, that's terrible, no ring? I have to imagine she'd be quite ecstatic with the concept, assuming that she believed him. She'd be very happy that he took the money and invested it, because $80 million goes a long way. Okay, here's the point. When a husband and wife get married, it's not just in this world, and it's not just until the Kvura. It's in this world, and it's a world to come. Meaning to say, it's husband and wife forever. That means to say, your life partners, and my Rabbi Shiva Zatzal used to say, partners in this life and partners in the world to come as well. And if anyone here says their spouse is going to Gehenna, you're in big trouble. And understanding that it's forever, this world and the next world is a yesod that's very important to understand. So here's the question. Yaakov shows up to Rachel with a tremendous value. I gave away all my money for someone else to fulfill a mitzvah. The Klal Yisrael will understand that for generations, that act. And that act is worth innumerable, unimaginable reward in the world to come. Yes, I don't have a trinket. Yes, I don't have a diamond for you. But I'm bringing you that mitzvah that I fulfilled, that the Klal Yisrael are going to speak about to Rachel Imenu that was much greater. So here's the question. Okay, he didn't have the trinket. He brought us something greater. It's like the chassan showing up with the shares of Microsoft. Why is Yaakov crying? Why is he walk in there crying? Why is he so upset that Vayisa kol aviev? Okay, and I'd like to see if this evening if we can understand why in fact he is crying and what in fact this Rashi shares with us. Okay, now to do this, I'll have to share with you a perspective. I was a high school Rebbe for about 15 years, and I found something very, very compelling. Guys could be very menschlich, they could have a tremendous sense of generally decorum, derech eretz, etc., but they had almost no appreciation for their parents. Zero. I'll give you just a couple of examples. I was once speaking to a fella, and I told him, maybe you should do this and this. He said, if I do that, I'm going to owe my father something. I don't want to owe my father anything. I wanted to grab the guy by the shirt collars. Fella, in whose bed do you sleep? Who pays your tuition? Who paid for everything since you were put into this world? I don't want to owe my father anything. And I used to talk about this on and on and on. And I would go through the math. If you're brought up not in a Jewish home, they say from the birth until 18 years of age, the average parents will spend $250,000 to bring a kid up. But that's not including camps. It's not including yeshiva tuitions. And I would go on and on that everything that you are is because of your parents. Your mother sat on the floor teaching you how to read. And your father brought you to shul. The fact that you know how to be a mensch, anything that you'll ever be, is because of your parents. Okay. One day in Shir, I was going on and on and on for about 40 minutes. And then it was time for a break. And finally one of the guys comes up to me and goes, Rabbi, I get it. I got it. But that's their job. When they decided to have me, they have to now do what they're supposed to do. So why do I owe them anything? And I explained to this young man that it's true. When you have a child, you're obligated to take care of that child. That's their cheshbon, but you are the recipient of tremendous good. Their obligation is their obligation, but you have been pampered and loved and taken care of, and you have to recognize that. And while we all understand that teenagers are pretty weak in this area, I'd like to share with you that most spouses are very weak when it comes to appreciation as well. And it's something that requires some real focus. And I'd like to spend a few minutes this evening on that topic. I remember very clearly when I was first married, we were in Kollel at the time. And, Baruch Hashem, I'm happily married. And again, my wife isn't here, so she can't argue with my observation. But it's been almost 30 years, and Baruch Hashem, we're very happily married. However, there were certain things that my wife did that I wasn't so happy with, and I remember distinctly saying to myself, but I can't say anything. Why? Because she's doing my job as well. She was working. That's my job. I was learning, and I had this real strong hasaga that I'm not happy with it, but I can't say anything because she's doing my job as well as her job. So gentlemen, let me make a very important observation. Unfortunately, many women work today, and unfortunately because it becomes a tremendous burden. She's doing your job. When you signed on that ksuba, you signed the words, Ana eflach va'okir ve'izun ve'farnes yischi. I'm going to work. I'm going to treat you with honor. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to clothe you. That's the man's obligation. And if a wife goes to work, whether she makes a fortune of money or she makes a pittance, she's doing your job. And it's important to remember that and important to understand that. But that's not really the sum total of a husband's obligation to appreciate his wife. Would you like to start dealing with the issue in a serious way? I have a little Musar exercise. When you go home tonight, go to your sock drawer, open the drawer, and look at the neatly arranged, freshly laundered socks. And then ask yourself the following question. Gee, how'd they get there? I don't want to be too graphic here, but a couple of days ago they were on your feet smelly and dirt, right? But they're neatly arranged. Now, there are no elves, right? No elves that come like, no. Your wife laundried. Your wife cleaned it. You know, the Shiva's father, Rav David Tzal, would not allow the Rebbitzin, his wife, to touch his socks from the moment it's not respectful to the Rebbitzin. But your Rebbitzin doesn't have that problem, or you don't have that problem allowing your Rebbitzin. But the point is, if a man looks around his house and just looks at his clothing, looks at his bedding, looks at the towels, looks at the pots and the dishes and everything in the house, you quickly see that there's a tremendous debt of gratitude, a tremendous amount that any man owes his wife. And it really goes much, much further than just taking care of the laundry and the house and the cooking and the cleaning and everything else. We lived in Rochester for 12 years. I was a Rabbi in the high school there. We moved to Muncie about 16 years ago. And when we moved to Muncie, I said to my wife, I don't want you baking challah anymore. In Rochester, there was no bakery that we could buy challah. In Muncie, there are quite a few of them. And I said, I don't want you baking challah anymore. My wife said, what do you mean? That's one of the mitzvahs of a woman to bake challah. Well, why don't you want me baking challah? So I said, it's very simple. You only have so much time in your day. If you want to know what the main mitzvah of a woman is, it's to be on the floor with our children, playing with them, bringing them up. And if you're going to bake challah, it's a nice mitzvah, but it's nowhere near the mitzvah of actually bringing up our children. And by the way, as an aside, and I mean it as an aside, I have a suggestion. You figure out how much cleaning help you could possibly afford, and then hire a little bit more than that. Because you see, real good time management is not about figuring out how to do more things in your time. Real time management is figuring out what your priorities are, what are the major things that really you want done. And if you'd ask me, the main thing a man should want his wife doing is bringing up his children. And folks, if you have children, you owe your wife a debt of gratitude that's larger than life. I just love it when the woman goes away for 3 days and she leaves the household to the husband. Now she spent 3 weeks preparing everything, make sure everything is right, and still the guy, hey, Shani's got the dentist appointment, then I got to hear, and he's frazzled to his extreme. And it's just a simple reality that if your children are half normal, if they're half clothed, if they're actually showing up to yeshiva, to Beis Yaakov as healthy, fed children, you owe your wife a debt of gratitude that's incredible and beyond description. Okay, now it happens to be that women also owe their husbands a debt of gratitude. I was once speaking to a woman who said to me, I can't respect my husband. He barely learns, he runs through davening and he does the daf yomi, but he's not really into it. I can't respect him. I said, okay. Now, she lived in a very, very nice house. She and her husband drove very nice cars and had quite a bunch of kids, and a number of them were in Kolo. So I said, let's do the math. What do you think you pay now in tuition and support of the kolo? She didn't have a clue, so I helped her do the math. And we figured out it's about $100,000 a year. Between supporting 2 son-in-laws and 6 kids in yeshiva, her husband was earning enough money to pay $100,000 a year for their children's Torah education. And then I said to her, tell me something. What time does your husband leave the house? About 6 in the morning. Good. What time does he come home at night? 8 or 9. I said, Mr. He takes an hour-long lunch, right? No, he kind of like quickly gobbles a sandwich. Well, all right, good, but he probably plays golf a couple of afternoons a week, right? No. In fact, he's frazzled and hassled and working. So I said, madam, do you appreciate your husband is giving his life, working day and night for one reason, so that you and your children should have a house, you should have food, you should have clothing, and look around your house and look at what you have and say the words, this is astonishing what my husband gives to me. The Steipler Gaon says, if you're not sure that you should be makir tov to your spouse, just imagine what it would be like if you didn't have a spouse. And imagine for a moment that you were bringing up your children in a basement apartment, your 6 or 8 kids or whatever it is, in a basement apartment, and you had no money for anything else. And then look at your life and you realize that there's a debt of gratitude that a wife has to a husband that is also immeasurable. And the reality is that on both sides of the mechitza here, we have a tremendous, tremendous debt of gratitude that we owe our spouse. And the strange part is that almost never does a husband appreciate a wife, almost never does a wife really appreciate a husband. And I believe that this is the 8th really dumb mistake that many smart couples make. They don't work on the appreciation. They don't recognize how much they owe their spouse, and therefore the marriage starts disintegrating little by little because that sense of appreciation isn't there. Now, you may say to me, okay, great, but why don't we do it? That's just the reality. You're busy in life, people are doing it, so I don't appreciate my spouse. I don't appreciate what my wife does to me. I don't appreciate so what could I do about it? So I want you to listen very carefully. There are 2 lo sases in the Torah. Lo sachmod means don't covet. Lo sisaved, don't desire, means don't desire. Don't desire your neighbor's donkey, his cow, don't desire his house, his car, anything that another person has. There's a full lav in the Torah not to desire. Now, the Ibn Ezra asks the obvious question. You could tell me not to do. You could tell me not to say. How can you tell me not to desire? And the Ibn Ezra says, only a fool asks such a question. And the Sefer Chinuch makes it even more clear. He says the words, it is completely within the hands of a person to change his thoughts, to think the thoughts that he wants to, and not think the thoughts that he doesn't want to. And I'd like to share with you a yesod for life. Your stream of consciousness, those thoughts that kind of like race across your brain, you can control them. But more than that, if you don't control them, then you are in very, very grave trouble. First of all, you'll violate many, many lo sases on a regular basis. But more than that, you'll never be happy, you'll never be satisfied, and you'll suffer tremendously. The Ibn Ezra's point, he says, is if you look at most of the mitzvahs of the Torah, they're to be miyasher the heart of man, to make a person think differently, feel differently. Those are most of the mitzvahs. And if you don't take control of that stream of consciousness, you'll never reach that. More than that, you're going to suffer tremendously. And this is not just the yesod for marriage. This is the yesod for happiness. It's the yesod for solving depression and jealousy and anxiety and a host of psychological problems. And I'd like to share with you an exercise. If you'd like to improve your marriage, here's a little exercise. You go home, you take a sheet of paper, and you write down the benefits that you receive from your spouse. Now, if you're a guy, you better bring 2 pads of paper because you're going to find a very long list of what I owe my wife. And if you're not sure and you can't somehow grip it, just do the next step. What if she wasn't in my world? What if she wasn't here? What would fall apart? And again, just go through the house and go through your children and go through your daily routine and write it down. But you have to actually do the exercise. Of course, I love when I say I got this great exercise, but you don't actually do it. If you listen to this, but you don't actually do it, it ain't gonna work. But part one is you spend time writing it down. Part two is the main part. Every day, for the next 30 days, you spend 10 minutes reading that list and speaking it out. 10 minutes. 10 minutes focusing on exactly what it is that you owe your wife. And ladies, the same. You focus, if my husband wasn't here, what would life look like? And you write these things down, and for the next 30 days, you spend 10 minutes a day reading them, and guess what's going to happen? Your flow of consciousness is going to change. During the day, you'll realize something. You know, I do owe my husband a debt, and you add that to the list. And you know, my wife really did, and you add that to the list. And if you do this for 30 days, you might just have a very different sense of who your spouse is, what your relationship to your spouse is, and I believe you'll have a lot more hakaras hatov. And that's part one. But there's a part two. Part two goes like this. Once a week for the next month, not once a day, but once a week for the next month, I want you to say to your spouse, I appreciate what you do for me, and then spell it out. Now I say once a week, because if you do it every day, it's going to be shock and overload, and like, I don't know, husband's going to fall off the chairs, wives are going to be, so it'll be sufficient right now for once a week. Once a week, you say to your spouse, I really appreciate that which you do, and you spell out what it is. Now, if you're a little shy in the beginning to do it, so you could write it in a card, you could write it in a note, but it really is a lot better if you speak it out. And what you'll quickly discover is, for most of us, it's very uncomfortable. And why is it uncomfortable? Because I'm not used to doing it. You get it? You hear the punchline? I'm not used to doing it. Do you know how many women have said to me, my husband does not appreciate what I do for him? And you know what? They're right. 100% correct. But it's okay, ladies, you're not totally off the hook, because I got to tell you, a lot of men also say the same thing. But this is one of the yisods. You see, if you want to work on your marriage, the first part of it is the positive stuff. That means the romantic part of you go out once a week, you build that bond, you build that attachment. The respect, which is also something you need to work on. And this is a tremendous third part, and that is appreciation. What it is that I owe my spouse. But the problem is that appreciation, unless you work on it, unless you really focus on it, it doesn't come. And you have to do the exercises, and you do it, and it changes. But this is the yesod. If you work on the positive, what you're doing is blowing up that balloon, and then what you got to figure out is how to remove the pins that you've been poking into it, and your marriage changes. No marriage changes instantly, but if your marriage is good and you start implementing the right tools, it goes from good to great. If it's bad, it goes to good. But it's slow increments. You blow more air into the balloon, you blow the balloon, and you figure out what the pins are, and what are the holes that you were popping into that balloon up until now. You work on the positive, you put more air into the balloon, you put less pins into it, and a marriage changes.